for open Q&A. All right, so let's go and talk about find the range. So there's really kind of two ideas. I'm not sure what the student was asking. They just said find the range of the function. So, if we're talking about, let's say a function, let's say a square root function looks like this. One way to look at this is the domain is basically the set of, X values that make up the graph. An easy way of saying this, like how far to the left to how far to the right does the graph, go? And so let's just say, let's down one. So in this case, the domain is going to go all the way to the -2, and then it's going to keep on going to the right, which we could say is going to not stop. So therefore we can say it's going to go to infinity. So the domain of this case would be from -2 to infinity. Now I'm going to use a bracket for -2 because -2 is actually a point on the graph. So therefore -2 is included. Whereas I'm going to use a parenthesis for infinity because infinity is actually not a value, right? So therefore the graph is just can be approaching infinity. So therefore, since it's not a defined value, we're going to use the parentheses. Now to understand the range, what we're going to do for the range is we're basically asking ourselves, instead of how far left and how far right does this graph go, we're going to say how far down does the graph go to how far up. So in this case, you can see the graph goes as far down as -1. And then as it's going to go to the right, it's continually going up. So it's going to go up to infinity. Now that's for the graphical approach. Okay. And that's basically when you're looking at a graph, that's kind of what ask yourself. We can get a little bit more detailed for different types of functions. But for this case, we can just say, how far left, how far right for the domain, how far down, how far up for the range. Now let's talk about a function. So let's say this function f of x was equal to square root of x plus 2 minus 1, right? So if I said fx, like how would I find, never mind, the range. Yeah. So how would you find the range of this graph? What if I just gave you the function? I said, find the range. Well, there's a couple things. One, you could go ahead and graph the function. Okay. So if you wanted to go ahead and, hopefully you could recognize the graph of the function using transformations. And so you could just go from there and take this and then graph it, right? So if you weren't given the graph, but you're given the function, you need to find the range, then graph it. Or typically what we do is a lot of times we're going to have functions that might not be as easy for us to go ahead and graph them. So the only other portion I wanted to bring into is go ahead and find f inverse of x, which I'm not going to do for this, but again, you could go through that process of swapping, replacing fx with y, swap the x and y and solve. And then just remember, find f inverse of x. Well, remember the domain of f inverse of x is the range of f of x. Okay. So if you have a function, you need to find the range, you can just find the domain of its inverse as long as you know how to find the inverse, right? And that's kind of the plot there. But obviously we, typically we're finding the range here and you can do that for this problem, but I just don't have time.